Good morning, or
Morning,
whatever
how
it is.
you doing?
I'm all right. I may be missing next week.
Okay.
Um, my
Hey, Chris.
Good morning.
So Will was just saying he's probably not going to make it next week.
well, if I am, I would be. I'll be driving. Probably, I'm almost certainly going to be driving between Chicago and Des Moines, so I could listen in. I mean, I could, get on the phone, have it.
Hmm.
There won't be much else going on. It's straight, boring drive.
Is it 80? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I will be actually, since we're talking about that stuff, I will not be available on the 23rd or the 30th.
Oh wow.
On the 23rd, I'll have my son down here in the cities,
Nice.
and I will already have moved out of my apartment, so we'll come back. So I'll go up to northern Minnesota and get him and bring him down here, and then we're going to spend a couple days in Minneapolis, and we're going to see Joe Jackson,
Sweet.
yeah, who I saw in Minneapolis. God, must be 20 years ago, but yeah, he's playing again in Minneapolis, so I thought I would take that weekend.
You're
Here we go.
not talking about the OG Shoeless Joe, right?
Yeah. And then and then I'll bring him back up to Bemidji, and then I will start heading towards California. So I'll actually be arriving on Friday, but I think I think Saturday the 30th I will still be in kind of confusion. I probably will not have unpacked a computer by that point.
Are you driving or flying?
Driving.
Yeah, that's a long drive. I've
Yeah.
I've I've done from the lower Midwest. Yeah, that's a lot of drive.
Yeah. The first day, the first day I'm just driving, I'm going to drive to Fargo and I'm going to see my daughter who will be staying up at school this summer. And so that'll be a short drive. But then, yeah, then from Fargo, I'm driving down to past Lincoln, Nebraska. So I'm kind of heading south and then I'm going to head west,
Hmm.
kind of all on a line. So the first night of the real trip, I'll be in Nebraska. The second night, I'll be in western Montana. I'll drive past Glenwood Springs. And then the third night, I'll be in western Nevada.
Hmm.
That'll leave me just like a 4 hour drive on the final day on Friday.
When you're going through, you said you're going through South Dakota? No.
I'm kind of going through the eastern edge of South Dakota.
I mean, are you going to have you been to either Rushmore or the Crazy Horse?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah. I've been on
so,
that trip. That's that's 90, I think, that crosses, or maybe it's 80 that crosses South Dakota, maybe 90. I don't know. I've been to the Corn Palace and
yep.
all that stuff on the way. Yeah. This time, I thought I was originally thinking on this trip that I was going to drive out to California, and then I was going to drive back, and then I was going to move to California at the end of the summer.
Mhm.
So the drive out was going to be kind of the southern route, and the drive back was going to be the northern route through Jackson Hole and into Montana and kind of across North Dakota. But that'll
It's
be
a
a
lot.
different that'll be a different. It's a lot of it's a lot of driving. But I like driving. And actually this will take me across kind of southern Utah. I normally drive through Salt Lake, but this time I'll be staying between Glenwood Springs and Grand Junction on, I think that's 70. I think I catch 70 in Denver. And so then I'll be crossing um, kind of just the scenic part of Utah. I'll be a little bit north of Moab, and I don't think I'm going to make a side trip to Moab. But I do think I'll probably make a side trip to Virginia City because I'll be very close the last night before I kind of drive down out of the Sierras into the Central Valley. I'll be I'll be in a place called Fallon, which is if I take Highway 50, that'll take me on the south side of Tahoe, and Virginia City is just like a stone's throw. So I might just see that, just because it's, big, big historic town if you're interested in mining. So yeah, so that'll be I've been sort of obsessing about this trip a little bit.
I mean, it's sort of you're life changing. I
Big
mean,
move. So it's crazy. I've been visiting Woodland and my folks and my sister in Sacramento, for like the last 30, 35 years. And it's always been a place that I've gone, for a family visit or for a holiday or for a vacation. So it's got very good associations. It'll be interesting to live there.
Mhm.
Yeah. And your sister's there too,
Yeah, she's in Sacramento.
or nearby? Okay.
Yeah, so she's about.
That's as mom and dad get super old, it's always nice that as much of the family can be nearby as,
Yes, yeah,
you know.
exactly right. And she's been the one who's sort of been responsible, for
Yeah.
everything. When my dad, had his cataract surgery or whatever, she was always the one.
Yeah.
It's kind of my turn to pitch in.
Or makes it a little easier and
Yeah,
less recriminations decades hence.
yeah, yeah. Well, and also, it'll be good. I mean, they're both, very healthy and independent right now. So I'm looking forward to, spending time with them,
Yeah.
and having some good years, hopefully. Yeah. So yeah,
Well, plus California.
yeah, exactly. So what's not to like?
Wildfires and earthquakes.
Hmm?
Wildfires and earthquakes.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess. I
What
guess.
drove me away?
But no tornadoes.
Yeah, it's gonna take a bigger wildfire than Eaton to scare me away, damn it.
All right, there you go. That's saying something.
I think it's one of the like number one or number two largest urban wildfires in U.S. history.
Wow. Yeah.
I think there are more structures that were burned down in one or two other fires, just from a structure standpoint, but like, you know,
Yeah.
it's
Well, I mean, it was the San Francisco 19, whatever the heck it was, 12 or
Right. The 19. Yeah. Well,
most of the fire.
06, the earthquake and fire. Yeah.
Actually, it was mostly fire, not earthquake, that took things down.
Yeah, because it broke the gas lines, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
and I didn't look it up because it seemed so minor, but we did have a small temblor yesterday, and I was like,
Hmm.
oh look, but then I figured it was probably like a two or a two and a half, and I was like, just not worth it.
Anything below like 5, you pretty much ignore, right?
Hmm.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
Well, it's crazy, and and I guess that is a feature of California. But the only earthquake that I've ever experienced was when I was going to UMass. There was like a 5 in Western Massachusetts in the 80s.
Yeah.
So you never know. Yeah.
Well, we just have different seasons out here. It's fire season, mudslide season, earthquake season,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, where my folks live, it's kind of deep Central Valley, soil over sand. So there's not a lot of, that's gonna, they're not on bedrock, and they're not on anything that's gonna bounce around, hopefully.
Oh,
So yeah.
because I just got it yesterday. Where are you going to be for voting? Because all my voting materials just showed up in the mail yesterday.
Oh wow. Oh, well, I'll be trying to establish my residency beginning in early June. So
Yeah.
yeah.
The big shock really is the car insurance, depending on how your neighborhood is. So, let that car insurance go for 2 or 3 years like everyone else does, and
well, he'll also still probably have to import just registering the car is going to have to go through CARB, right? Or is that still a thing? I mean, okay, when I lived there way the hell and gone ago, I moved there in 89. I was 89 and 92. It was almost impossible. It was very difficult to drive a car, to import a car from the other 48, the other
Hmm.
lower, not exactly import, like you bought your car from, in the Midwest or New York or whatever, and you drove it into California. The hoops to get this thing certified for California emissions then were
Yeah. Yeah.
real
I
deal.
think, from what I've read, it's easier
Certain
now
cars are
because
all
the cars all
air.
conform to the
Yeah.
CAFE standards.
Yeah, yeah,
So and mine's a 2023 Subaru,
yeah,
so it should be okay, I think.
Yeah.
yeah. All right, yeah, yeah. I guess
Yeah.
yeah.
The
It's
only
not
place it'd
really
be
an issue.
easier is Colorado
Why?
Yeah.
What do they got?
because it's a Subaru.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah. It's a and it's a yeah, I've had a lot I've had more Subarus actually in my life than I've had anything else, I think, oddly. Um, half a dozen really almost.
They're reliable. They got
Yeah,
four-wheel drive. Wait,
yep.
they still all have four-wheel drive?
They're still all yep,
Yeah.
yep, that's all that's the only thing they make. Yeah.
And half of them are made in Lafayette, Indiana, where my several of my relatives are on the line.
Yep. Yep. So yeah, and I've had really good luck with it. And it gets like I mean, even going through the winter, it's still, I mean, it got like 32 miles to the gallon. So, so I was kind of thinking, they keep the dealership was always sending me these notices that, I could get a lower monthly payment if I, kind of traded in, because they keep their resale value pretty well. Of course, that would be a lower payment over a new longer term. So I'm not really I'm not biting at that bait, but it was kind of for a moment there. I thought, well, they do have a hybrid now, but because unlike Toyota, which in their all-wheel drives, it's basically front-wheel drive plus an electric motor on the back. Subaru retains the viscous coupled four-wheel or all-wheel drive that they use in all their cars, and that actually, I think, that brings their hybrid mileage down to like 36. So it's hardly even worth it.
Yeah.
So anyways, looks like we're it for today. So
Yeah,
so
we
how
did.
we
Eric's,
I
you saw
caught up.
Eric's email, right?
but Eric did say he was
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, he was going to miss, and Mark's got all these games that he goes to and stuff. So yeah. So and Tim finally was in contact, but he's said he doesn't care about Hoover.
I mean,
Typical British response.
Yep.
the thing that I think about that actually is really coming to me from because I sympathize with what he's saying, you know, but the
Hmm.
thing that's really coming to me from this book, particularly this section here, is just what a he's an interesting character, but it's more a history of that period of the West.
Yeah.
It's he just happens to be the lead player in his little story here. But I mean, this whole I have never really read. Again, the section we're talking, today's section, yes, I did finally catch up. Is so much about sort of the World War One. I had never really looked at World War. I didn't even again. I think of myself as somebody who reads history and everything. I didn't really notice that Belgium basically was going to get starved out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes,
you know,
I was not aware of how significant he was in saving the Belgians. That
yeah.
was that was interesting because I was familiar with sort of his post-war kind of European reconstruction work, but yeah, that was really something. I mean that's I mean I hope they got a statue of him in Brussels
I'm sure
Yeah.
they do.
because they owe him one.
Yeah, but I mean, again, it's just but that there's so much say history that he just happens to be. I mean, again, he's a moving figure, an important part of, but
Mhm. Yeah.
it's just this is a really interesting perspective, and it's sort of also that perspective. He's talking about London is sort of the capital of the world. It's the nicest place in the world to live, you
Hmm.
know,
Yeah.
and this is and the I mean, I even think a little about there was this whole remember the McDonald's idea, the idea that no two countries that have McDonald's in them could ever go to war.
Right. Right. Yeah.
No. And that sort of assumption, we got that same assumption going on here. It's like, oh yeah, everything's so interconnected in Europe. There's no way we could ever have a war amongst them. And
Hmm.
yeah, again, mindset and everything else, but also this, very, I see so many parallels
Hmm.
to, now. you know,
Yeah. Well,
uh,
and also the idea that they were kind of, there was some people said
mhm.
that the thing that was so shocking about the First World War was that there had been 100 years of peace before it, right? Which is really not true. I mean, so there was,
Franco-Prussian War, yeah.
right, there was the Treaty of Paris, right, at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, right? But then, yeah, the Franco-Prussian War, the Crimean War, I mean, for crying out loud, so
Yeah.
there's a lot. And, but it was, in terms of the great powers, I suppose. But but also they fought a lot through proxies, right? The whole scramble for Africa at the end of the 19th century, was all about, kind of imperial ambitions and imperial rivalries. So yeah, the idea that Europe had been at peace is a little bit, should be challenged.
Yeah, there
The
just
other
hadn't
thing,
been a war between France and England,
yeah,
really.
yeah,
Yeah, that was the piece.
yeah,
And Germany didn't exist as a country until pretty much
right.
the Franco-Prussian War. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Hmm.
yeah. Italy didn't exist as a country until, these
Right.
are all,
Yeah, till 1860s. Yeah, and then Germany 1871. Yeah, and that whole idea. I memean, that the way that Bismarck kind of unified Germany was by going to war with his neighbors and saying, "Well, come on, guys, we got to pull together because we're being attacked." Um,
yeah.
and the last one was France, and the Kaiser was crowned in the Hall of Mirrors
Oh, wow. I didn't
at
realize that.
Versailles. Yeah, so it was part and parcel of that victory over France, kind of the establishment of the first German Reich, and they did call it the German Reich,
Hmm.
right from day one. So it's not like Hitler invented that idea. So yeah, it's one of the things that kind of struck me about Hoover though is that Whyte is portraying him as being very selfless in this. In terms of, well, I guess in terms of financial gain, right? He's
Yeah,
already
yeah.
he's already wealthy, right? He's not looking for any angle as far as the way that Whyte is depicting him. And that was interesting to me because that's very different from kind of the way I normally think of Americans in the context of the First World War, because normally, and when I teach the First World War in world history, I spend a lot of time talking about J.P. Morgan and Company, right, and about Thomas Lamont in 1915, making this speech in front of the American Social Science Association or something like that, about, and I think it's called The Effect of the War on America or something like that. And he says that we are poised to become the world's financial center, right? And we have this opportunity right now that the war has afforded us this opportunity to change the global default currency from the pound sterling to the US dollar and to change the center of finance from the City of London to Wall Street. And the only things that need to happen in order to bring this to reality, to fruition, is that the war has to go on for a long time and our allies have to win. And I think that is, I mean, the way that I kind of look at the war is that is the key to the puzzle of, why Woodrow Wilson runs in 1916 with the motto, "He kept us out of war." And then, in April of 1917, I think April 2nd, he is in Congress asking for a declaration of war. So within, a month and a couple of days of his inauguration, he is going back on his one campaign promise, right?
Yeah.
And the thing that happened, of course, is Russia,
Hmm.
Yeah.
and so all of a sudden if Germany's going to only have to fight on one front, then holy shit, Lamont's scenario is not going to play out. It's going to go on for a long time,
Yeah.
maybe or maybe not, but certainly the Allies are not going to win.
Well, there was that and the telegram almost at the same time.
Zimmerman
The
telegram?
Zimmerman
Yeah.
telegram, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Which puts at least the psychological pressure of enemies to the south of us as a
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. I think too much has been made of the Zimmerman telegram. I
Yeah.
think both at the
I
time
have
and
I
in the
have a
history books.
Well, and at that
hilariously
time too, we
weird
have
thing.
the Spanish-American War is still a living memory for these people,
Hmm.
and that was, presumably viewed as a rout, I think. Like,
Oh
hey,
yeah,
we we won this so easily,
splendid
so
little war. Yeah.
it's not as big a deal.
Well, and the other thing that isn't that it isn't as widely known is that between 1914 and 1916, the American Army trained. I mean, Pershing is running around,
Well, that's
Yeah.
just
kind of
training.
Southwest Texas and
Mexico too.
northeastern
Occupying
Mexico,
parts of Mexico.
chasing Pancho Villa, and so they had just had, the Mexican Revolution had just happened, right? So you've got a decade, after Porfirio Diaz, you've got this decade of kind of chaos, and then you've got, this military action on both sides of the border. And our excuse is that that they crossed over and they killed some people in a town near the border. But we're always claiming that that the first shots are fired on American territory.
Well, how much was German submarine sinking of American ships a factor too? Because that was
Yeah,
roughly
that
that
is a
started ramping up at
I
about
mean,
that same time.
Well,
And
it started
international
re-ramping
trade
up,
was a piece.
right? Because the
Yeah.
Lusitania was sunk in
15?
1915, right?
Yeah.
And so and America protested, and Germany said, "Oops, sorry, we'll
Yeah.
tone that down." And then but then the blockade, the English blockade against the Baltic ports that Germany is accessing for its supply lines continues, and 500,000 German civilians die. And then they say, well, okay, we're going to have to, kind of ramp up this submarine warfare again. So it was really kind of a threat that submarine warfare was going to increase more so than, but, it's kind of weird because Whyte does mention, the speech that Wilson makes in April of 1917 when he asks for the declaration of war. And I've actually, I actually assign that as a primary source to my students sometimes, and he says, and of course Wilson is always doing this kind of very high blown, kind of rhetorical thing with, the war to end all wars, and the making the world safe for democracy
Yeah, yeah.
and all of that. But he also, in this speech, he says that war against business interests, American business interests, is a war against humanity, and he kind of equates those things very very tightly.
And we haven't seemed to have gotten away from that 100 years later.
Yeah,
Like, you know,
yeah, yeah.
although
Well,
we
and so that's why I question, is her is Herbert Hoover really this financially disinterested? Or is this just
yeah.
not is this not a part of the story that Whyte is interested in?
I think, well, again, I think that with he's already talking at this point. Right before the war goes off, he's like winding things down. He's like, I want to go buy a newspaper and
Mhm.
maybe be president of Stanford. He
Yep.
has made his money and he's thinking about the next chapter no matter what. He's got all the money he ever needs at this.
Yeah.
He feels like he's not interested in he seems to be primarily interested at this point. All right, I've got the money. I've got the money. Now I want to go maybe get into elected office or something at this point.
Mhm. Mhm.
So yeah, I don't think I mean, I think his currency that he's interested in at this point is much more about political connection, raising his political profile. And and there I don't actually see any change in his methods. He is still absolutely ruthless, and I think in major ways very self-interested.
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
he's trying to
Yeah.
become famous. But
Right.
yeah, because he doesn't care. He's got plenty of money.
Right.
Yeah. I'm
Right.
You know,
40. What am I going to do with the second half of my
Yeah.
potential life?
Hmm. Yep.
Although what strikes me as odd here too, going into the war, he seems to lose, he loses a lot of his household structure and integrity. His wife goes back to America broadly. And it's several times White mentions that, like, he's giving his own personal financial assurances
Hmm.
money to
Yeah.
feed Belgium.
Right.
yeah,
It sounds like he's financially ruined by all of this, yet there's no talk ever about, oh, I'm worried about how am I going to eat? How am I going to, you know, live? How am I going to do whatever?
Hmm.
There's the cables back and forth between his wife, like, do I build a 50-room mansion or a 5 square foot, pied a
Right.
the
terre,
big one.
Cottage.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah.
And
Right.
he gets into some trouble later on, politically because he's building some fabulous thing.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But it's not, it sounds like he's made a fortune and kind of worried with the war that he might lose some of it, but it's never like, hey, I did lose it, or I'm really in trouble, or
Hmm.
hey, I'm so stupidly wealthy now, I really don't have to care about it. And there's not a good clear, I don't have a good clear beat on what that position is.
Right. Well, and that's kind of what I'm wondering too. And being that he is, largely a Western character, right? I wonder if the models, White doesn't. I didn't notice White talking a lot about, the people that Hoover might be emulating. But, I'm wondering if he's imagining himself in a mold like, like Hearst or Leland Stanford, that.
I mean, he sort of sees himself. I think he sees himself. Actually, I don't know if he does see himself, but he is a manager.
Yeah.
He is a really, yeah, and I think he sees himself as something new. We are
Well,
the
yeah.
the
Okay.
new thing.
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that. Well, it gets us right back to wait, it was him, right? We were talking about Homo economicus or
Yeah.
whatever, or
Yeah. That was kind of my thesis last week. Yeah. That
yeah, and I think that
he's
he's still,
this new type. Yeah.
yeah, he's the CEO,
Yeah.
who
Mhm.
also ends up getting a huge part of the partnership. So
Yeah.
so CEO capture of value. Hey,
Yeah.
I want to very quickly, there's something I want to show you guys. We were talking about the Zimmerman telegram.
Hmm.
Back when I was like 12 or 13 years old, we found in a used bookstore this wonderful piece, and you can't see the front page, it's water damaged. This is a great piece of propaganda from then. It's called My Adventures as a German Secret Agent by Horst van der Goltz.
Oh
I
my
read
God.
it when I was 12 or whatever. And like he is like, oh, I did all this great stuff because I was trying to make America. It came out in September of 1917, you
Wow.
know, and it ends with, I love America and I hope that someday it'll be the United States of Germany, you know, but yeah, it's like,
Yep.
that would be worth fighting for, the end. It's just hilarious, but
Wow.
but yeah, I just we were thinking about the Zimmerman telegrams. Like it's all about he's, I'm sure, a completely imaginary guy. You
Hmm.
know,
Yeah.
basically, I did all this stuff to move forward the Zimmerman telegram, and it was
Right.
just part of our vast campaign. So anyway, I just wanted to.
Right.
Once we're talking about that, I had to go find this,
Yeah.
ancient.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Yeah. Well, and as I understand the story, Zimmerman actually authenticated it. At first people thought, maybe it's a hoax, and Zimmerman said, no, it was real. But the Mexicans said, yeah, we never for a second considered this seriously, and so yeah, so I would. It probably I guess my instinct about that is that it probably had propaganda value
Oh yeah,
in America, and I think American leaders at the time, because even then, Germans were the biggest ethnicity in,
Yeah.
immigrant ethnicity in America at that point, and still, I mean, still are today, the biggest single ethnic group in America. And I think that there was, and of course at the time there were, coming out of the end of the 19th century, right, and all of the, the labor action and the anarchist, kind of anarcho-syndicalist union stuff that happened, around, Homestead and, uh, and all of these, and all these, these massacres and things that happened in Chicago, especially, right? That, and Chicago had German newspapers, and Milwaukee had German newspapers, and all of these cities that were predominantly, I have oh, it's not on my shelf anymore because I packed all my books. I had an atlas from about 1901 that was, from that census, they had produced a bunch of maps. And they were, and mostly they were population density maps, which I found really interesting. And I kind of made a series of them in a video. But then some of them were also kind of demographic maps. And one of them was a map of ethnicity. And it had this shading for people. They called them, what did they call them? They called them people of foreign.
Non-Anglo-Saxon,
Yeah, that was the gist of it. I can't remember the exact wording that they used, but it was people who either were immigrants or their parents had been immigrants, and big swaths of, Michigan and, Illinois and, really kind of the upper Midwest, what's now the Rust Belt, were solidly more than 50% first or second generation immigrants, and mostly German. And then there were some places, like Chicago and Milwaukee, that were more than 75%. So that was, so coming out of, I mean, that was like the turn of the century, but, 10 or 15 years later, that would have still have been a concern, right? That, oh, wait a minute, what's going to happen with loyalty?
And that's even sort of a big part of the rise of the Klan in Indiana. The rise of in Indiana, the Klan was not, there weren't any black people. The Klan was about those, those Catholic immigrants.
Those Catholics, yeah.
Yeah, those Catholic immigrants,
Right.
and mostly German Catholics.
Yep. And yeah, and they were, and people, Teddy Roosevelt was kind of a notorious kind of racist shit, but but he was also, kind of really concerned about hyphenated Americans.
Mm.
And that was the kind of the terminology that they used.
Yeah.
So this idea that, but it's interesting that, that kind of being in, in the context of London, when it all begins, Hoover sees it as, oh, just this, silly Baltic, scuffle.
Yep.
Well, the other curious
or
thing,
not Baltic, but Eastern European.
the other curious thing too that happens here that's interesting for this time period and the age with respect to Hoover is he's in midlife, he's in his 40s when the war hits. So you've got, and essentially the war goes through, and at the end of the war is the end of the long 19th century in some sense.
Mm-hmm.
But Whyte opens up chapter 10. The era of the frontier had been declared over, and
Right.
the rapid urbanization had dawned. So here you have Hoover, this business figure who has gone out and done the frontier. In fact, he's not only gone so much to the frontier, he's the first student at Stanford, but then he keeps moving further west, and he goes to Australia, and then he goes to China,
Mm-hmm.
and builds kind of businesses in those places and makes his fortune as the frontier is ending.
Mm-hmm.
Then he kind of resets and goes way back east and spends almost 15, 20 years in London.
Yeah.
Except that he is, it is sort of a transition of, and actually that's interesting too, because, like I said, I typically think of, World War I as this watershed moment when finance shifts across, westward across the Atlantic from London to New York. But yeah, probably from the turn of the century on, from before the Boxer Rebellion onward, right? Because what he's involved in is sort of the beginning of sort of the extension of imperialist mercantilism from Great Britain to America, right?
Well,
So,
it's also those seeds of like globalism
yeah,
beginning,
right.
and it's with an American who spent time in Australia, spent time in China, then
Hmm.
goes to London before he comes back and centers on
Right.
the middle of America.
Right. And at first, while he's in Australia and China, he's working for a London firm, right? And so it's really kind of that transition of extractive industry, right? And this whole kind of center periphery mercantilist imperialism thing, I think, that Britain was doing throughout the 19th century, and then kind of at the turn of the century, America says, okay, let's get in this game. And he's right at the he's like the first guy to get up on his board on that wave, and that's really interesting
Well, and
because
he's got a finger in all these different pots as well as he's doing it. So
yeah, yeah.
it's
And
um,
then when he shifts to public facing service, right, with this, especially this residence committee thing, for the
Yeah.
first set of refugees once war is declared, he gets to use all of those skills, right, and he also gets to kind of assert, you know, the way to do this, and the only way that I'm willing to do it is if there's a single executive,
And it's him.
and it's
yeah.
him, right? Yeah, and
And
Only
while
he
he's
can solve it.
Well, only right. That's the Trump line. Only I can solve this. But he's not wrong that it would have been much more chaotic and much less effective if there were all of these little organizations, trying to do their little niche things. But it just
well, that's the funny thing that through this whole section that I keep reading, the don't give an executive too much power, in this case, the idea of American freedom is much more heavily entrenched in the electorate and the people
uh
that they can give some leeway. Whereas I feel like right now in America, we can't give too much leeway because we're on the precipice of going the opposite direction.
uh
Um, so it sounds easier at this time, but what's crazy is the like super anti-American, anti-democratic perspective of what this guy is doing at this time. And I almost think of it as, and it's much harder to do now even in Hollywood, but there's this idea of the auteur director who like really leads as a dictator top to bottom to
uh
make, so if you're Hitchcock, you make exactly the movie you want to make because you're Hitchcock
Or
and you
Werner
can do
Herzog
it.
hauling a boat over a
Um,
mountain. Yeah.
And well,
but you can't in current day, unless you're maybe a Spielberg or somebody, but even then it's a creative, very democratic process, and you've got to rely on your editor and your cinematographer and all the other below the line people to like do their jobs well to make
uh
this story.
uh
there,
And we don't have that. So and there are other media pressures, but we don't have like really strong directors saying, "Here's my vision, and this is what we're going to make." We don't see that in Hollywood now compared to 20 years ago. But that same type of kind of democratic process is happening. How do you
Even
work
something, even like
together?
early Christopher Nolan, or is that just too
well,
long ago?
again, I want to even get to Christopher Nolan really quickly here. I loved just
Hmm.
to go to the end of this section where the stinger is, oh, that's Louis Kahn, the guy who or who took down Oppenheimer. And then, but exactly to your archetype of the one guy who's in charge of everything and it's too much power and everything, Oppenheimer. You
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
so it's all interesting, sort of again wrapped up archetype of can you have the tyrant or whatever,
Yeah.
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 Or somebody at least who is able to push, so you get a figure like an Elon Musk who can take a company that already exists doing electric cars, but push it to the forefront, and then, he shoots himself in the foot with his political aspirations. Although that does kind of bring to mind too some of the um you know, it's framing his, Hoover in some extent here is described almost as being neurodivergent
Mhm.
in
Hmm.
terms of his attention and attention to people. So, but sometimes it sounds like he's very, you know, tied to the emotional plight, especially of children in
Mhm.
several sections.
Hmm.
But he just ignoring, he's in a car crash, the tire blows out, and he doesn't skip a beat. Like, who cares what's going on? He doesn't say anything to the chauffeur. He just walks away and is still so single-mindedly focused on the thing he's working on. It's like, oh, who cares? We'll continue on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which makes him, maybe a little Aspergery, maybe I don't,
I think, I mean, again, armchair diagnoses of autism happen all the time, but I mean, he sure does have a
Well, and
lot
it's
of
not
indicators.
even,
Yeah,
even now we're still trying to figure out what those are. So, but
of
there's a
course.
spectrum.
Yeah,
Yeah.
He's sounds like he's certainly on it. And
yeah.
how far off, the mainstream he may or may not be is, at question here. But, and
Hmm.
even his interactions with his wife and his kids, like,
Mhm.
you're away from your kids for 11 months and and maybe those were letters that were burned. Maybe he's writing his kids every day. Who knows? But
Right.
I
Right.
get the impression from this that,
Passionate
like,
erotica
the
between him
wife
and
is
his wife.
taking care of the home fires and he absolutely is not.
Hmm.
And not even really worried about it because he knows, oh, maybe he knows my wife is taking care of it and I trust her. So he got, if
And
nothing
she
else, he
was
got through the month.
extraordinarily capable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She was somebody who
Yeah.
he had
Apparently. Yeah.
immense respect
Yep.
for. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of I don't. I mean, obviously, we're gonna move into parts of his life in which his, these habits or
Mhm.
tendencies of mind that he's developing, in this time are not going to serve him as well. But I think that so far, I'm willing to consider the idea that this guy is not a sociopath,
Oh, yeah.
which is not something that I'm usually that willing to grant that easily if somebody becomes president of the United States.
Yeah.
So that's interesting, and that's kind of refreshing, I guess, to some extent.
Well, and particularly because we know him to be a little bit of a cheat, a little bit of a dodger. I'll go over the line of what's legally, ethically, and morally
It's
the
despicable.
mainstream to make my business oats.
Right, right, right. The devil thing, right, and then the totalitarian kind of tendency when he's president. So yeah, but this moment here, that we've been kind of at in this, in these early chapters of this section, where he does this relief thing, and he does it, he gives away all kinds of money, and he gets. And then ultimately the government funds
He
do come in,
lends all
but he
kinds of
runs
money.
a tight ship. I'm sorry, what was that, Will?
He lends all kinds of money. He doesn't give away any money.
Well, he doesn't give away his own money, but he distributes money. I mean, what I'm saying is he
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
distributes this relief money
yeah, yeah.
to this refugee population without creating this huge administrative behemoth
Yeah.
that then needs to be doged, right? Which would be what would happen today, right? So it's a tremendous. I mean, I think that's kind of an interesting feat that he manages to recruit all of these people from, and they are people from his class. So there is an element of class and sort of noblesse oblige and all of that goes with it, right? All of these people,
Wait, what's that? What was that word, Dan?
noblesse oblige.
Yeah, what's that?
Well, that just means that
I
Yeah,
I know what it means. I mean,
okay, I
like
mean, but
it
yeah.
doesn't exist as a
But
concept in America
oh, I mean, oh, but
anymore.
yeah,
Like,
okay,
you
but in
know.
the yeah, I guess in this context, yeah, I think it's appropriate. I think I used it appropriately in this context.
Oh no, you totally did. I was
Okay.
being sarcastic as
Oh,
a
okay.
son of a
Oh,
bitch,
I
you
see.
know.
I see. Yeah. Yeah. No.
Like
Yeah. So
noblesse oblige. What's that?
what is that? Yeah. Yeah.
That'd be like Trump taking a markers from Scotland and changing the word, you know,
But maybe he doesn't think of himself as noble.
Mhm.
yeah, yeah,
Maybe he
oh
thinks he's
no,
some type
yeah,
of scrappy underdog. I don't know. I
yeah.
can't even I can't even fathom. Um,
The world's always been mean to him, so
yeah, he's a
as far
victim.
as he's concerned,
Yeah, he's a
yeah,
perpetual victim
His dad
underdog.
never loved him.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Um, yeah, so then we get 1914 and the Europe that he had known is dead and it was
yeah.
never coming back. And he's stunned and unstrung for the first time, lacks a clear sense of direction. Um, which is interesting, that he sort of thinks of himself as this, I mean, to go back to what you were saying, Chris, about globalism, right? He thinks of himself as this international person, although he never kind of abandons his. He's
Yeah.
asked, he's invited to at that one moment, right, to become a British subject and to get and maybe even get a peerage, and he doesn't even really kind of seriously consider it.
No, he has a specific, and that's a specific sort of class resentment thing.
Yeah.
He does mention, he's like, oh, the Brits were always mean to me because I was some American. I throw their peerage idea back into their
Mm.
teeth. I'm not
But
interested.
and if you look at the economics of what's happening to general peerages in Britain at the time,
Yeah,
all these kind of noble families, and it's almost starting even before World War One, but World War One certainly hastens the demise, especially if you watch, but as a small examples, the last 2 decades of upstairs, downstairs, you
Hmm.
know, TV shows that kind of portray this. I think it even started in the early 2000s was with the Forsyth saga was a
Mm.
big thing. And I think that made it easier for Julian Fellows to do Downton Abbey. It's
Hmm.
like, hey, this is a thing. But
Yeah.
that kind of history of, the nobility kind of slowly sliding away and the rise of, the businessmen
mhm.
or business
Yeah.
people kind of taking over.
When did the lords go to life peerages?
Oh, that's a good question.
I'll look it up.
Because
It's
that's
like in the
that
70s.
kind of shift is happening at the same time, and it's not as described as heavily in this book.
Yeah.
But he also be as a essentially a nouveau riche guy who has made it on the Western frontier
Yeah,
Hmm.
in
Yeah.
the shift from the frontier to financialization and globalization,
Right.
which he stands astride almost perfectly in terms of lifespan and his personal
yeah.
interests.
Yeah.
And his personal interests are shifting at this same time too. Like, hey, I've done this mining stuff. What's the next thing for me?
Right. Right.
What's the
Well,
second half of life going to be?
yeah. Yeah. I just looked it up. Life peerages in the UK began in 1958. Tim could have told us that probably, with the
Yeah.
Life Peerages Act, which received royal assent in 58. And that was really kind of the watershed of the shift from hereditary peerage to these.
And then was it like this week or something, the last week or two, they finally kicked the last sort of hereditary peers out of the House of Lords? It's in the last couple of weeks,
Interesting.
is
Yeah.
that sort of that end bit of, and that had been planned for a long, it was like, I think that might have even been, first negotiated under Blair or whatever, but that eventually the House of Lords was going to have no hereditary peers in it, and that finally happened within the last, month.
Interesting timing. The bishops must still be in there though.
Well,
Uh,
they're theoretically Really not hereditary, theoretically.
Mhm.
This isn't Italy,
Yeah. So
Medici Italy, at least.
yeah, right. So yeah, so we're still yes, I'm what I'm doing here, I think I mentioned last time, what I typically do while we're talking is I sort of scroll through the chapters
Yeah.
we're covering. And so where I'm at right now is I'm still in the first chapter, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, we've been bouncing around a little bit
Yeah.
rather
Yeah.
than.
I guess no, maybe yeah. Then the a pirate state organized for benevolence um,
Yeah.
is the second one, and that was I thought that was an interesting kind of description of um, and I think Will what you were talking about, this idea of how much rope do we give these people to exercise power, uh,
Mhm.
you know is certainly kind of evident in this this idea that he's tremendously effective. He mostly uses it for good, but are they setting precedents that are going to come back to bite him?
And well, I mean, there's an interesting other piece to that, or a piece that, I mean, it's really leveraging American neutrality.
Hmm.
So much of it is, leveraging that everybody needs America at this point,
Yeah,
and so you can't offend Herbert Hoover, who is running this basic, fundamentally American effort,
yeah,
uh, to bully both the Brits and the, well, not just bully, but sort of manipulate. I mean, it's actively manipulating and deceiving
yeah,
both the Brits and the Germans.
yeah.
Um,
Certainly,
uh,
certainly spinning. Yeah,
yeah, but
Heavily
I go
spinning.
there and
Yeah,
yeah, I go there, I go to Berlin and I say, hey, you got to do this, otherwise the British will do that, and and we got a lot of personalities involved too, of like,
yeah.
well, we're happy to slaughter all those belt. That was the other thing, the crazy, I mean, again, they were really mean. The Germans were being incredibly mean to the. I mean, really thrilled about how mean they were to the
The
Belgians. I mean,
Belgians. Yeah, yeah,
it's like, let's go murder a bunch of people. I mean,
yeah.
I didn't realize how vicious. I mean, I assume that this is backed up in history, and this isn't just Whyte saying it, but I mean, I kind of assumed that everything that went wrong with Germany basically happened after World War I, and it was like a new thing in the Nazis, and that's why but no, they were already doing this crap, in World War I.
Well, I think yeah, and I think that White is not making this up. I think it's
Yeah,
not untrue,
yeah,
but I think that he doesn't talk about the blockade, right? That kills 500,000 German civilians,
hmm,
right? And so they, they're, I mean, and both sides are doing,
horrible stuff.
are gassing, people are
Yeah,
gassing soldiers in the trenches, and and the gas is rolling downhill and wiping out villages near the battlefields and stuff like that. So total war is already kind of happening. It's weird though, because yeah, it does interest me that Hoover gets to be the only guy who can cross borders, who
they
is
got their own
sort of,
flag. They have
yeah,
their
who's
own,
got
yeah,
his own flag, and he is, and there's orders that come down from the top in Germany, even that this guy will not be harassed and touched, and he will, and he'll travel freely, which is,
Well, Germany
which is
still
interesting,
doesn't want
but
America in it at the time. Like if they're smart enough, at least from a Clausewitz perspective. Like if America enters the war now, we're really in trouble. So
yep,
well,
let's
then
not
there's the other,
inflame them.
and then there's the other bit also, which the thing that the Brits are always complaining about is the Germans are actually stealing a lot of food.
hmm yeah,
Yeah.
This is a way around the blockade, not just to feed the Belgians, but it's also, the Germans are taking a significant portion of the food that is coming in for the
right,
Belgians.
supplements
So
their
they
supply,
have their own reasons for wanting this
Yeah.
to,
Oh yeah. Let this guy who wants to bring food in. Let's let him.
right. Right. On the other hand, the thing about these, kind of the other thing that struck me about this, this diplomatic stuff that's going on over the top of the actual war fighting that's happening in the
Yeah.
trenches on the battlefields, is that these people are all related.
Mm,
And I mean, the Kaiser is Victoria's grandson,
yeah.
and so and again, from the German perspective, they get, they come together and they become a nation in 1871, and they want to sit at the table, right? They want to be a great power as well, and they don't
They wanted to
understand.
be they wanted to be Britain's. They wanted the alliance to be with Britain.
Yeah,
Fundamentally, it was just they were kind of stuck because Russia was there, and
yeah.
but yeah,
Well,
yeah,
right, and so there's this great power, the great game that's being played between the British and the Russians,
yeah,
all along, and the French are kind of involved because they're an ally of Russia, and they've
yeah.
and they've been a hereditary adversary of England, and then yeah, and then the Germans kind of come to the table and say, well, wait a minute, we want to play, right?
Yeah.
And
Well,
we're a
and
nation, and we're a
you,
nation now. And then they
you
become,
got
and then
you got to remember the book we just finished talked about Napoleon coming in, and he actually his one of his mistakes was he helped unify Italy, and
yeah,
he helped unify all the
Germany.
little principalities in Germany into a German state
yeah,
and created an idea of nationalism that
mhm,
like
yeah. Well,
coheres this group that prior to that had been small little fiefdoms doing their own things.
right, right, and that is that the reaction to Napoleon, the generation later is really, kind of Bismarck, and he has this vision,
Yeah.
and but then they also, the other thing the other part of the story that we don't tell quite as much is that then, in the years between 1871 and 1914, Germany becomes the biggest economy in Europe,
Mhm.
and Germany catches up to and passes Great Britain in industrial output, right, and
Yeah.
GDP, right, and by the beginning of the First World War, they catch the Royal Navy,
Mhm.
and so there's a lot changing in Germany because they put a lot of, they put a lot. I mean, it's like Japan, right? They put a lot of attention on that. They reinvest a lot. They have from that perspective, from the sort of industrial policy perspective, they have a much more tuned economy towards national growth and towards military industrial kind of progress. And so while Britain is just kind of being, kind of chugging along and being fat, dumb, and happy, and starting to fight with, labor government, right?
And
The
watch
Germans are
their bigger
focused.
empire
Yeah.
because
Right.
Britain's a small place with empire everywhere way far away, whereas
Right.
Germany is just unified,
Mhm.
big industrial, and right in the center of Europe
Yeah.
with trade on all sides.
Right. Right. Well,
Germany has one colony, if I'm remembering correctly, Southwest Africa.
they have it. They have Southwest Africa. They're in South Asia as well.
Oh,
So yeah. So they do have some colonies, and they are trying to become, a colonial empire.
where were they in
They
South Asia?
I don't remember. I'll look it up because it becomes relevant once they lose it at the end of the, okay, where was Germany's colony in South Asia? Oh, Tsingtao, between
Oh,
1898 and 1914, and New Guinea and Samoa. So they had this area known as Little Germany in China. So it was a naval base, and it was kind of the economic center of Shandong. So yes, and they lose this at the end.
Tsingtao beer is very good, and it's probably originally from Germany.
Probably is. Yeah, that's a good connection. Yeah. So they brought the brewer's craft down to down to the Chinese, and then the Japanese, of course, kind of jump in, and because they're an ally of ours in that war, um, and that kind of kickstarts their, their Asian co-prosperity sphere, or whatever the hell they call it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Asia for the Asians, which is not an unrealistic or untenable kind of a concept
Yeah.
if they'd gone about it in different ways.
They want their own little empire, yeah, an
Yeah.
exploitative empire that's
Yeah. Yeah, but Germany, unlike, I mean, Germany does have industrial capacity, and it does have natural resource capacity that
mm,
Great Britain didn't have. So it was on a little bit better stand. I mean, it wasn't completely, self-sufficient and self-contained like China, but it had a little bit more kind of going for it. Um,
yeah.
but yeah,
And it was the new science was chemistry, and they were, yeah,
yeah, right,
they
right. Well,
were
yeah,
they were
and
preeminent.
right, and Fritz Haber had just done his thing,
Exactly, yeah, yeah.
and so the Haber-Bosch process was working by that time, and a big motivation for that was that Britain had already been blocking them from access to Chilean nitrate, right? Because the British were heavily involved in developing the Atacama Desert nitrate fields after the War of the Pacific in 1878. Um, so that was another that was another. I mean, Germany did have some legitimate complaints, with which to sort of enter the war, and that was one of
But again, what they did in Belgium was
them.
unnecessary.
Yes, yes,
Yeah, it's one
yeah,
thing to march through. It's another thing to go murdering whole city. It was reminiscent of sort of what we hear about the rape of Nanking and
yeah. Yes,
and
and which kind of it sort of begs an explanation, doesn't it?
yeah.
What's the beef between the Belgians and the Germans? Because they do it again in the Second World War,
Hmm.
right? So yeah, there's probably more to that story that I don't completely understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Argentina gets a very brief mention as a source of ag products, I mean, Argentina. I don't really know that much about it except that Argentina is where tons of immigrants went, German immigrants and Italians.
It had the highest, I don't, like I think right around in right around this period, it like had one of the second highest GDPs
Yeah,
in the world. It was
yeah,
this amazing, huge, new thing. Because it had everything. I mean, it had all the natural resources,
it
and
did. Yeah, yep,
it's
yep,
and it even industrialized somewhat.
yeah,
It's just this massive thing that, I mean, they managed to stay out of um, but
yeah.
yeah,
Well, and then
um,
and then after 1924, when the U.S. kind of closes up immigration,
yeah,
then it
yeah,
really explodes.
yeah, and
Yeah,
then and Brazil as well.
yeah,
Uh, but
yeah, yeah.
but but yeah, he's like you said, it's the whole pirate thing. It's
Mhm.
interesting. He's like, he's his own country.
Yeah. Well, and then it's just kind of interesting that during this period in this Pirate Nation um, chapter, he's also very interested, Whyte says, in sort of forgetting his past in China and the Boxer Rebellion and
Mhm.
all of this, and that is and that there's a California connection to that too, right? Because his wife Lou is having to
No, he
talk
wasn't a
to.
hero in World War One.
Right. He
In
wasn't. He
in, in the
wasn't. He
Boxer
wasn't
Rebellion.
a. He wasn't a war hero in China. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, given that because one of the big influences for me in the Boxer Rebellion is Smedley Butler,
Uh-huh.
right? And that whole idea that this is just, this is being, this whole thing is being undertaken on behalf of really people like Hoover who are going into these places and extracting raw materials for globalist industrial combines.
Yeah. No, but it's interesting. It's interesting, sort of, and people are starting to really get after him. I mean, the Admiralty is digging up stuff on him, uh, and he gets into a personal, the whole personal feud with this Lyndon Bates guy. He's like who wasn't saying Herbert Hoover's name enough.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and it almost seems, especially with the Admiralty, right? Like he's I mean, it reminds me of a scene from like Peaky Blinders, right? Where once he becomes a member of parliament, where, people start to, the old posh aristocrats think, he's gotten above his station, and he's presuming too much. And it was okay. He was useful to us when he was kind of, when he knew his place and he was working on his level, but now he's presuming. And I got a little bit of that sense of, kind of the British, and that probably reinforces, why he, never seriously considers, you know, switching citizenship and becoming part of that,
Yeah.
that posh class, and probably because he realized he would never be
Well,
accepted.
it's also at this point too where there's that discussion of progressivism and the rise of progressivism, which seemed to have stalled with Wilson and the rest of the gang.
Hmm.
And Hoover here is accused of being a Republican for the first time, and we really haven't heard, he runs for president later as a Republican, if I remember.
Hmm.
But
Does he even vote
there,
during this period? Yeah.
there's no description of who he's voting for, who he may have
Right.
supported, which party he's a member of.
Right.
Prior to this point in the book, I think is the first time, like
Yeah.
he's a Democrat supporting Wilson, or at least currying favor for on the Democratic side of politics,
Hmm.
to the
Yeah.
point that they're accusing him of being a Republican, which I find a little interesting, especially as I'm watching the ideas of progressive politics and how Hoover is both kind of progressive, but at the same time, the early seeds of what is now the Republican Party in modern America.
Hmm.
Um, but it also, what's kind of curious too is this same section, he's described while they're doing the treaty, he gets an early copy of it
Yeah.
and is like, oh, this doesn't reflect what we discussed and it's going to be a problem and we
He's
need to like try and hamstring it, which is interesting going back to his negotiations in the Boxer Rebellion where he's backdating things. He's rewriting stuff to say what he wants it to say rather than what was actually agreed on. So
Hmm.
he has seen this kind of
He knows how this game is
backroom,
played.
he's seen this backroom politics and chicanery before,
Yep.
and I'm a little bit disappointed that Whyte doesn't draw this parallel and make it more apparent, particularly when he's having a private detective follow his adversary and dig up dirt. Like, how are his adversaries not digging up dirt on him to say, hey, he's done this before, this is a thing,
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
or it could, and which could play poorly in politics for him later. But it seems like one of the benefits of him being a not Washington insider are here's a guy who has some experience and can do this, but is not tagged with whether he's a progressive or not
Hmm.
in terms of his being able to get things done. Um, but those pieces I kind of find, I wish Whyte were talking more about some of the politics that are going on here and
Yeah.
which side Hoover is actually on,
Yeah.
because to some extent he's being very anti-democratic in terms of, I'm the king of this area and I've got a monopoly over
Food.
When it's within
Mhm.
a two-page framework on page 147, there's literally the this description of global supply network, which is like
Yeah.
very early, um, you know, globalism in a
Yeah,
sense. And then
yeah.
within the next page, he's trying to hamper competition and create his own monopoly over the entire American food network,
Mhm.
So it's
which
not for
is,
personal gain, theoretically.
oh,
Yeah.
Right.
and it's nice that it's not for personal gain because we totally have lost, which is why I
Yeah.
joked about the idea of noblesse oblige, because
Right. Yeah.
we don't know what that is anymore in America.
Right.
Well, he doesn't want to get rich. He wants to. He's again looking at the next step. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's. I
Yeah.
mean,
I mean,
I mean, I find. I think sort of related to that is sort of you know, and what you were talking about with the he gets his own copy of the Versailles Treaty. In advance. I mean, he's practically Wilson. His relationship with Wilson and the development of his relationship with Wilson. I mean, because at the end of it, and for most of the war, he's practically co-president. You know, I mean, or maybe I'm overstating a little bit, but or even back to sort of I mean, he's running
well, he's
so
certainly running
much
foreign policy in Europe.
and domestic
Yeah.
policy.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
Well,
what's
yeah.
curious too,
food.
Yeah.
decades ago, I remember having read Margaret Macmillan's, was it Paris 1919? And it's essentially the story of the treaty and how it came to be and the politics. And
Yeah,
she focuses more on, the Wilsons and and in fact, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was her grandfather was David
uh,
Lloyd George. So she's got some familial history, although she's writing as a Canadian history
Hmm. Yeah.
about, you
Yeah.
know, and
Oops.
she at least comes out and says, "Hey, David Lloyd George is my grandfather." So as a historian, you know this for potential bias
Right.
purposes,
Be
but
advised. Yeah.
I looked it up and Hoover's mentioned, his name is mentioned maybe 2 dozen times, but he gets maybe 5 pages of 10 pages of book in her book,
Hmm.
whereas obviously in a biography of Hoover, it's going to focus more on Hoover
Yeah.
and his piece. Although she does specifically talk about that him get the episode where he gets a copy the night before and says, "Hey, this is the first time we're seeing it all together."
Hmm.
And it's not what we had expected. So
Right.
she's got that same story in her book,
So that kind of
but
corroborates.
he doesn't seem to play as big a role in all these negotiations and what's going on as Wilson does,
Right.
which is super fascinating because in Whyte, he's describing Wilson as a very hands-off the war type of president.
Hmm.
Like he sounds like the Western playboy,
Yeah.
reading and frivolity, eating and doing what he's doing.
Messing with
And
his new girlfriend. Yeah.
yeah.
I'll
The whole
spend 10
situation with
minutes
the
talking
I
about
didn't.
what's going on with the war, but
Yeah. I want to. I want to. Yeah, I want to read more about Wilson.
Yeah.
All I knew was wife took over when he had the stroke. I
Yeah.
didn't realize it was the new wife and that he was like chasing her around, and all that stuff. Yeah.
Interesting. It's interesting. Yeah. And I wanted to go back. I had wanted to say earlier, so I'll go back to it now briefly. I kind of object a little bit to the idea that Wilson was a progressive. Um,
Mhm.
you
Oh,
know, I,
I agree entirely. Yeah.
yeah,
yeah. Well,
and
that's the thing. And
Basics.
he may have been more progressive earlier on in his first or running and in his first administration,
mhm,
but I think certainly by the time of 1916, like,
right,
and White kind of describes him as like he's not progressive anymore. At least if he was, he's not actively doing anything about it.
yeah, yeah. See, I kind of imagine him as in the same way that in the 1896, I mean, the Democrats do this a lot. In the 1896 election, the Democrats ran William Jennings Bryan, right? And they basically lifted the entire Populist Party, the entire People's Party platform, and and ran with it, at least rhetorically. Not that they were actually really going to. I mean, they did some things, right? They did implement some of the, some of the things, direct election of senators, and a lot of elements of the populist platform did do, actually get realized in the first couple of decades of the 20th century. But really, I, I think of that as they kind of absconded with populism, right? And they sort of
Usually happens.
in the process of it, of doing that, they neutered it, right? And I think that they did the same thing with progressivism, that was a different thing until the Democrats grabbed it, and then it just became kind of this, this slightly left of center,
Yeah.
element of their party platform. The getting things done thing, though, is an interesting kind of a distinction
Yeah.
that Hoover does kind of bring to it. And in the Versailles Treaty negotiations, again, I want to put a little more emphasis on, kind of the business and banking interests, right? Because Thomas Lamont is there too, and he's central, right? And I don't think he gets mentioned at all. I don't think his name comes up in this book, and and so that he's one of the major interests, leading the you know kind of the American point of view, but also kind of making these arrangements with, and kind of channeling France's huge desire to really bleed Germany with
Yeah.
reparations.
Well, that's the one of the other interesting things here too is World War One, and or at least based on the focus that Whyte puts on it with Hoover, is more about who can do food production best, and that's going to be the thing that wins the war.
Hmm.
Whereas World War Two is doesn't seem to be so much about food, but who can industrialize and out manufacture things to win that war.
Hmm.
And when you look at, even future setups, even now, like we have gone into Iran and destroyed all of their ability to manufacture even small things, small war material versus the bigger, the other question of do they have nuclear capability or not? But they don't, we have now bombed most of their smaller bomb making facilities, and it's going to take them a while to build that back up so they're not nearly the threat they were a year ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago. Even though the headline of fear is, oh, they're going to get the nuclear bomb, and that's
Hmm.
a big thing.
Yeah.
But that kind of shift from agrarian culture to which Hoover is also standing astride as well is that industrialization of America
Hmm.
and how quickly, and Taylorism in 1911, 1912. So we're mechanizing and turning all this stuff into machinery, and how
Right.
much can we physically manufacture, which is one of the benefits that America has in World War One. We're so far away from the fighting lines. The British would have to worry, hey, the Germans are flying over our country and dropping bombs. If we
Hmm.
don't have the ability to make war material and we have to rely on America to import it for us or use it on our behalf once they're in the war. Um, so even in World War II, it's kind of a little bit of it is how do we get enough food to sustain the people, but then how do we have the war material to win it at the end? Um, but that shift in what's happening in history up to this point and how wars are fought
Hmm.
is, is a big thing, although I think Whyte too doesn't spend, he spends more time on Hoover's piece of it than the industrialization piece, which is, a big chunk.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and the loans that American banks give to Britain and France are
Mm.
huge. And so financially, so yes, we don't become the type of manufacturing um, giant in the First World War that we do, kind of in the Second World War. But material support and financial support is really, I mean, it's kind of central. And White doesn't really talk about it as much as he might, I
Well,
think.
and you have to wonder too, what does that do to Britain for the next century when they've got all these loans that their empire now has to pay off
Hmm. Yeah.
to some extent.
Well, and
So how
ultimately,
do you,
that's how India gets free in the Second World War, right? Is that the Indians become the big creditor in
Mhm.
between 1945 and 1947. England owes more to India than any place else, and they leverage that.
yeah.
And then even further on, I mean, the Suez Canal crisis, which
Hmm.
ends because the French and the English owe us money, owe us a ton of money,
Yeah.
fundamentally. We say, okay, we're going to call in you back off of Suez,
Hmm.
or we'll call in the debts. Yeah. Um, and that's what I keep reading. I hope I'm not putting that wrong, but
Hmm. No,
Well,
I
this
think
is up.
yeah.
Yeah. But
And also,
it's fascinating to watch how all these early bits of history get us to where we are now
yeah.
in
you
broad
think
part.
do you think the Chinese are going to call in our debts? I mean, they sure would like the Strait of Hormuz open.
Yes. Yeah. Well,
And we owe them a ton of money.
we owe them a ton of money, right? But it's sort of like that old saying that if you owe the bank $1,000, they owe you. But if you owe them $10 million, you own the bank. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, so
China can write off our debt. They're self-sufficient. What are they going to do with it? It's just a bunch of dollars.
well,
Well,
we could
part
just
of it is
repudiate
that
it.
the idea of Harari in the last book of we create these mental structures of what is money and who
Right,
owes who and how.
right. Well, and that
Whereas
right,
in this book, Hoover is not worried. He's not worried about the intellectual. It's literally the how do we get food to
right.
people
Yes,
as a
yes.
thing,
Much more
which is
practical.
a
Yeah.
direct, immediate
Yep.
piece.
Yep. Well, yeah, and it doesn't, yeah, so it's not theoretical, but and going all the way back to Graeber, right? Graeber also, I think it was in debt, said that, at some point we have to consider whether this is a credit relationship or a tribute relationship with China. So,
Well, and you can easily wipe the debt off by saying, "Hey, our guns are bigger than your guns."
mhm.
Um, and where does that battle actually occur? Or where is it occurring now? Right now it's in the financial space,
Mhm.
rather than boots on the ground in one country or another.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and would that ever happen in whatever the next phase of war is? Would you ever see Chinese boots on the ground in America or American boots in China? Because it's more about
Well,
large
there is
nuclear
precedent
missiles.
for one of those things,
Yeah.
but not the other.
Um, in fact, in this very book.
Yeah. Right. And so that's kind of that's funnily, that has kind of an echo in the present, right? This idea of, yeah, who has China invaded in the last 100 years? Who has Iran invaded in the last 100 years? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, we don't normally want to kind of think about it in those. terms.
Yeah. Or even if you go back 2 or 10,000 years, what do those things look like? And
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
most of our history, it's these areas invading themselves,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess the
versus
ancient Persians, did they had a nice little empire. So
yeah.
yeah.
Well, a bunch of like quirky small empires over time. In fact, the idea of empire started out in the ancient Middle East,
Yeah.
the ancient Near East.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So I'm scrolling through, the
where are we at now?
I'm scrolling through here. I guess I'm in the food administration, uh,
Yeah,
you
that's
know,
cool.
and
Interesting
sort
stuff.
of the House of Truth and and him dazzling Walter Lippmann, so Oliver Wendell Holmes and Walter Lippmann, kind of make a little appearance, and Felix Frankfurter. Um,
I do like the Asquith quote. Um, you told me you were no diplomat, but I think you are an excellent one. Only your methods are not diplomatic.
yeah,
Yeah.
yep, yeah, which is an interesting, I guess, maybe coming attraction of sort of America throwing its weight around in England and
Well,
Europe.
yeah, when you're a, fourth tier kind of non and Hoover at this time is an entity, non-entity with respect. He's Britain in Britain helping Belgium.
Yeah.
And only in America, he's an American in name only in some sense. And yet
Hmm.
here he is sitting in the prime minister's office dictating policy in just a weird way. He's managed to acquire enough power that he's in this office doing this thing.
Hmm.
And it's not even the American president who's doing it. It's if he's fifth vassal down the line,
Yeah.
dictating foreign policy in the weirdest of ways.
Hmm.
Um, it's kind of the sort of weird, quiet power that Bob Moses had in New York because
Oh yeah,
of his financial ties,
Right.
but he's not an elected official in any way, shape, or form, yet he can dictate what's going to happen across multiple spaces, which
Hmm.
seems to be the same type of power Hoover is leveraging at this point.
Yeah.
yeah. But he's very sensitive to public criticism and his the public perception of him. That's so many of these wars or whatever. He's got that one senator going after him and all, but he's very interested in not just okay, I've got to get this done, but also I have to be perceived a certain way.
Hmm.
Because he's obviously he's thinking ahead. He's thinking what he wants. I think he already wants to be president at this point. Um,
Hmm.
that's my guess. That's my read on it. I mean,
Okay.
he, he's what else is he going to do at this point?
Right. Well, and
uh,
it's interesting because he's in his mind, I agree. He must think of himself as the guy who can actually move the ball, right? And whereas you've got all of these people, sitting in these conference rooms in Versailles, and then meeting and signing papers in the Hall of Mirrors or whatever, and and then and you've got Sykes and Picot, kind of dividing up the Middle East because, of course, the part of the story that Hoover isn't involved with apparently is oil, right?
yeah,
Which becomes huge, in this period, from 1909, through 1912, and then into the period of the war, and so they're acutely aware of that Iraq is where the oil is.
yeah,
And so that, and that that whole region is going to be strategically important. But he is, getting 2 million eggs out of Galicia and doing these actual things and being, and being the food dictator of the world. Um, which
Administrator. He doesn't like the word dictator.
well,
Administrator.
what Lloyd George or somebody calls him that though, right?
Yeah, yeah. But he's
Yeah,
very careful. I don't want the word dictator. I want administrator. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And it's interesting that Keynes talks about him, and and Lloyd George also says in addition to say you're a diplomat, but you're a mean diplomat. He also says his surliness of mien and his peremptoriness of speech, and his lack of parliamentary arts, which is his kind of his calling card and his advantage, really.
Well, he's
That's
built up enough mythology around himself in the Belgium piece,
Hmm.
and he leverages that to put himself into that position in the Wilson administration.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I've done this before. I know how it works. I've been in Europe. I've been on the ground. I'm
Hmm.
probably the only American to have actually been in Germany during the war.
Right.
But I can do this. I have the expertise. And even what I don't, he seems to be portrayed by Whyte as someone who could manage to figure it out, even if he didn't know.
Yeah.
He could gather the data, had access to pieces of data, and could figure it out and do the thing. So they give him the job,
Hmm.
even to the tune of sidelining the head of agriculture within the US government. I kind of wish there had been a little more about the politics behind how he managed to win the guy over
Hmm.
or sideline him just because dint of will.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and it's interesting that that there's that passage which it's a block quote, and I'm not sure who says who is cited here. 22. Oh, Hoover himself in The Ordeal of Woodrow Wilson is saying, I rose early at daylight and went to walk in the deserted streets. I met General Smuts and John Maynard Keynes, and they
yeah,
all have, and they're all, kind of disappointed by the bullshit at the top, right? These are guys who are actually the people who function in these um, diplomatic corps or whatever, and in the negotiations, and they're just seeing this, this kind of this weird thing. I'm wondering. I didn't notice that the U.S. Senate's resistance to the treaty and to the League is really, kind of foregrounded. But that would have been an interesting story too, just to see where, where Hoover is in relation to, because of, really it's Republican senators, right, like Henry Cabot Lodge or whoever, who kind of put the kibosh on ratifying the treaty and joining the League because of this idea that I mean, it's really kind of an American firster sort of an idea, right?
yeah.
That we shouldn't be, our prerogatives shouldn't be, sort of proscribed by this internationalist cabal or whatever it's going to be from there.
well, particularly at a time where nationalism is at its peak fit
Hmm.
in this time period. Like it gets a little worse going into World War II,
Yeah.
that idea of nationalism. And, we're seeing a little bit more of it now too, or at least within America,
Hmm.
a
Are you
Yes.
sense
seeing it?
of American
Look, all through
nationalism.
Europe. I mean, too. I mean, even the guy who replaced Orban is still nationalist.
Yeah.
He's going for less corruption,
Hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
and he wants to be part of the EU.
Yeah.
Uh, but
Yeah. Well, and that whole thing, I mean, that's Brussels again, right? So it's sort of like it's all the Belgians' fault.
again, it's hilarious, by the way, because Belgium. I believe they still after it's like they still don't have an actual government, right? It's like they're still split. They haven't been able to come to a consensus on who's running the place because they're split between the French, the Francophones, and then and the Walloons. Well,
Yeah.
probably backwards, but But Belgium is the center of the EU, except and it's a metaphor for it right there
It's
because
a metaphor
they
for it
can't.
all. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, and if going 500 years back in their history, right? They're the center, or along with, Hanover and a couple other places of the Hanseatic League, right? Which is never a nation, right? It's just kind of an informal trade association,
Yeah.
although
Well,
albeit with its own navy.
Yeah,
and it's well, and that's the issue for Washington, D.C. is it really doesn't have a big enough infrastructure to be its own city, yet it's the seat
yes,
of,
it does.
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
or at least there's always this but the battle between the president and the mayor of the city,
Yeah. Right.
which gives you kind of the other end of that kind of power spectrum of, you know,
Hmm.
is the city the seat of power, is the seat of power the city?
Yeah. 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 And Hoover apparently is, and that's why it would have been interesting to hear more about, kind of the Senate's objections, because Hoover apparently splits with Wilson over, some of this stuff, and especially over the League of Nations Charter. Right.
Yeah. Well, I kind of find it interesting too that I mean it's kind of wallpapered over that Hoover kind of took Wilson's side generally, but it would have been more interesting to see and hear more about the places where they differed and why and how they, worked together or apart.
Hmm.
Or was Wilson just have so much power that Hoover was dependent on him suckling at the teat to have what he had, you know?
I don't know. I mean, my impression is that Wilson needed Hoover too, because Hoover was the guy who could get the stuff done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Wilson would have just been, waving his hands and talking, idealistic words, had it
Well, there
not
was
been
that kind
for,
of,
for people like Hoover who were actually, you know, making things
yeah.
happen.
Well, and Hoover in the situation where it relates to his philosophy for his kids, like, get something done, be a doer
Yeah.
kind of thing. And there was a section where I think they talked about the philosophy between him and Wilson being the East Coast educated elite. And they didn't really mention him, but Wilson, I think, is one of the few sitting presidents to have had a PhD
Hmm.
anywhere in histories, and
Yeah.
he was kind of
Maybe the only
an
one. Yeah.
academic
Yeah.
from way back. So he tends to be more of a thinker
Carter,
as
actually,
opposed to Hoover's doer.
I
Hmm.
think I think Jimmy Carter have a
I'm
doctorate? I
checking.
mean, because he's a nuclear engineer. I mean, yeah,
Yes. Wilson's the only PhD president.
okay.
George W. Bush had a MBA, but only Wilson. I think that Carter's training was Navy.
Yeah, but he did actually. I mean, he did actually have.
An academic degree in physics?
Yeah, maybe it was a master's
Yeah.
or something. Uh, I could be wrong about this. I'm off and in.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that that at the end of this period, as we're kind of going into this beginning
Uh-huh.
of the post-war period, and Wilson's going on his whistle stop tour to try to ram through his agenda and appeal directly to the people, which may realistically, I don't know that it's that historians have really connected this, but that may also be an early the reaction to that. Um, is probably the beginning not only amongst the Cabots and the lodges and the blue bloods of a kind of an American first thing, but the fact that Wilson starts running around the country making these whistle stop tours maybe begins that kind of opening that as a question,
Yeah.
internationalism versus America firstism. But this idea that Hoover is this sort of disinterested, um, he's people say, I mean, the things that people say about him are really um, paint him in a good picture, paint him in a good light. Um,
Yeah. Well, that's a curious thing too, is seeing his what he's done for the Belgians and kind of the war effort versus, and prior to reading this biography and knowing pieces of his early history, like
mhm,
the name Hoover just is generally besmirched in America in a general sense, and broadly because he's tagged with Hooverville
right.
is an issue going into the decline.
Hmm.
Um, and somewhere in this section of reading, there was you know, they define the word Hooverism, I think was the phrase, as you know, a variation of who he was. So he's
Yeah.
also he's kind of building a brand within America for
Yeah.
what he's done,
Yeah.
good, bad, or indifferent. And I don't know. And this is kind of the beginning of big branding for American presidents in this general era of who are you going to be and have a longer standing name. Because prior to this, most of the branded presidents are the Washingtons or the
Roosevelt.
Lincolns and the Roosevelts. And that maybe that's the beginning too, is Teddy Roosevelt is one of the first kind of brand presidents where people broadly know who he is and what's going on, other than that he's just the president and we're
Mhm.
America.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Well, I think that there's an interesting. I had the thing that this has done for me that's been useful is, that I had sort of, what I had understood previously about Hoover was not only the Hoovervilles and not only, kind of sickened the, the cavalry on the bonus marchers, um, but also this idea of associationalism, right? That I had understood as being sort of a, George H.W. Bush, thousand points of light, up by your own bootstraps kind of thing, right? But now I have a different perspective on it, right? Because now it's sort of like, well, if associationalism is, let's get a bunch of, volunteers together to save 7 million people in Belgium, right? And organize these types of relief campaigns and and do this kind of stuff. This isn't just, George H.W. hand waving saying, "Oh yeah, church groups and people will pick up the
yeah.
slack, so government doesn't need to do anything." But so I think so I think that's been valuable for me to kind of understand that he had, he kind of brought the receipts when he said, that this
Yeah.
that this can be done another way other than the way that Franklin Roosevelt did it, and maybe it could have been had there been somebody like him to actually lead it, but nobody, kind of stepped forward to do that.
Well, at a time when so Taylor is, publishing what becomes Taylorism in like 1910, 1911, 1912,
Yep.
and kind of making management a science for
Hmm.
how do you run a business, how do you run a corporation. And Hoover, with his prior business experience in other countries, there's no mention in here of him having read Taylor or the
Right.
Taylorism movement, but he seems to have, by dint of experience, internalized it and knows how things should be organized and how they should work, how to structure the work to get the thing done that you want done,
Yep.
which
minimizing graft too.
Prior to this,
Yeah.
like the US government doesn't seem to be working on these kind of scientific principles of we can be better by doing X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And even more so now in modern, science and how to do things from a managerial standpoint, America seems to have eschewed those ideas, and government is incapable of doing anything, so we should just get rid of it all is the solution. But when you do that, it means corporations have to move in and do the thing instead. And how much of it becomes the profit motive of taking not just getting the thing done, but doing what Hoover didn't do. Like, I'll get the thing done, but I won't take personal profit out of it while I'm doing it.
Yeah.
Whereas we now are doing the opposite of let's have a corporation do it, but let the corporation extract all the profit out of the process, which
Hmm.
is, you know, this time period is these two pictures of how you could do these things and why you should do them one way or the other in different ways. But
Hmm.
he seems he seems to be he has an innate ability to see the science of how to get the thing done. And so let's go do it and do it this way. But as part of that, he also seems to, I mentioned the auteur theory of, Hollywood directors. He seems to have at least some of his country's best interest at heart in doing it, or if not his country's interest, keeping people alive and
Yeah.
feeding them, will balance in American ag space the profits of the farmers and the people versus bread on the table while we're running a war,
Hmm.
which is not an easy thing to do. And that's a super hard thing to do from a democratic perspective of we're just going to make this happen.
There's a quote in the book. Somebody describes him, and I don't remember exactly, but one of the people that of the time says, whatever Hoover is working on, he is absolutely convinced it's the most important thing in the world, right?
Yeah.
And I think, and I'm paraphrasing, but I think I got about it right, and I don't remember who said it, but I think that regardless of whether or not he's trying to do good, he wants to do whatever he's doing as best as he possibly can.
Hmm.
And I mean, I think, I frankly think that, given the opportunity to run hell, he would want to run the most efficient, murderous hell possible.
Sure.
And then
Yeah.
maybe I'm going overboard a little bit. He does seem to have a real soft spot for hungry children,
Yeah.
and which is a real thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, he seems to be, and this the through line through his career is, if he's running a mining camp, if he's doing this, if he's doing that, he wants it to be run the best possible way it can be, the most efficient possible way it can be. And so it's not so his version of Taylorism, and I guess it's sort of
Yeah.
close to Taylorism or whatever,
Well, the
is
word
is that,
efficiency definitely is in there, like baked
yeah,
really hard into
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely, he's in there. But it also gets us a little bit back to the previous book. It's like what was the object? I'm doing it. They were talking about an existentialist Nazi is still going to be a Nazi.
Yeah. Yeah.
Essentially, that wasn't quite the quote, but you remember what it was. There was this thing in Harari's thing talking about if you can adapt whatever. Again, I
Hmm.
think in a different situation, yeah, I think he probably could have you know dehumanized the people who he didn't see as human, and still made sure that the kids that he did think were humans were fed
Yeah.
as
Well,
efficiently as possible.
for me, that's the interesting thing about this is even if you do it smartly, intelligently, and efficiently,
Yeah,
what happens in your lifetime can affect the politics of what happens a
Yeah.
century hence.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
Well,
how do you do that thing? How do you do agriculture policy during a war where you're, and they don't essentially use the phrase benevolent dictator, but that's roughly what he
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
Well, that's what
And
the Manchester Guardian said about him. He's been the nearest approach to a dictator Europe has seen since Napoleon,
Uh,
right? And
yeah,
they actually, so that word was in use about him. But then, then Keynes once again said, never, and this is block quoted too, never was a nobler work of disinterested goodwill carried through with more tenacity and sincerity and skill, and with less thanks either asked or given. The ungrateful governments of Europe owe much more to the statesmanship and insight of Mr. Hoover and his band of American workers than they have yet appreciated or will ever acknowledge.
uh-huh.
I think that's a really interesting sort of combination of kind of dictatorial, sort of totalitarian, kind of autocrat. I guess maybe autocracy would be maybe the right word, not
Yeah,
totalitarian.
yeah.
So sort of an autocratic approach that he learned in business, and and then applied and so far again in appointed government service, not elected government service. So that's going to, so that will be, I guess, in the next
how does
section,
that
and
shift?
kind of become a big element. So yeah.
Well, you mentioned last week too of this era of Herbert Hoover's early business career and where um, technology and the tech bros and that the word benevolent dictator has been used about more tech CEOs
Mhm.
in the last 20 years. And the real question is,
Which of them
how
have been benevolent?
benevolent are they really? The Travis
Yeah,
Kalanick's of the world, maybe
right,
not so benevolent, whereas
right,
somebody like a Matt Mullenweg actually for WordPress was maybe a little more benevolent and useful for what that was,
right.
versus
Right, but man,
many.
and
But
opinions change about people, like
yeah,
Elon or Jimmy Wales.
yeah.
So
Or the what are they doing and how does that affect the rest of the world? So if you had somebody who was actively benevolent running something like Doge, you could do something useful. But the
mhm,
issue is he really is not benevolent. He has
That's
other
smart.
underlying purposes at play that we want to do something to government so that business can win out 100 years from now.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, it's complicated, but it does seem, at least the way that Whyte is telling this story, that that Hoover is slightly less problematic at this point, at least, than I had expected him to be. So either that is an artifact of the way that Whyte chose to tell the story, or maybe it's
That's,
maybe it's for real.
I think that's in the eye of the beholder. I see him as this despicable. I mean, I think he ended up achieving some great
He
stuff.
saved 7 million people.
Yes, but he is. I do not see him. I see him as he's he's despicable. I mean, the things he does. Again, he is afraid of what comes of his past coming to light, and I don't think, by and large, he is really. I don't think he's particularly motivated by. I feel like he's mostly motivated by
well,
this is exciting. This is an interesting problem to solve, and I recognize. I sympathize a little with
yeah.
that. It's like, oh, this is a challenge. This is a cool challenge. It happens to be it happens to end up being for the greater good, but I think I don't think I really get the sense that this guy he really likes self-aggregate. He's a self-aggregate. I can't say the word, but you know the one I'm trying
Aggrandizing.
to say.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Well,
Um,
so you're thinking if he had lived in Nazi Germany, he would have been a very effective camp commandant. Is that?
He would have
oh,
been
he would
a
have
better
been
Engels than Engels.
he would have been Albert Speer plus, plus Himmler.
Well,
You know,
that's
I
the
think
key.
I don't know that I disagree with it, but I think Whyte would disagree with it. I think that Whyte would point,
well,
I
let's
think Whyte would
bring
wave
White.
back at his, at his Quaker roots or something and say, no, he had something.
But that's the thing, though, is
I
White along the
don't.
way is specifically saying he doesn't go to church. He
Right.
has distanced
Yeah.
himself from the Quakers. There's
I'm
some
not
of those
saying he's a
basic
practicing Quaker.
philosophy.
I'm saying that I think that White's idea was that this had, even after his, kind of moral world becomes entirely secular, that there, that having been born and brought up in that world colored
Yeah. It
his
set a
yeah,
baseline at
yeah.
least
I think
of
the baseline set, I think we get this from White, is more that he doesn't he wants to be appearing to be modest. He doesn't like titles. That this is
Okay.
more surface crap.
Okay.
That he's more gotten surface stuff and
So you
than
see him as
actual.
being much more Machiavellian.
I think I see him as amoral.
Okay.
yeah.
I see him as
But
largely amoral.
he is definitely trying to build a power base for
Yes.
himself in the things that he
Well, see,
does.
that's the thing is I think that you've said that a couple of times too, Will, that you already see that he is, he's putting his pieces on the board.
Yeah.
All right.
Absolutely. But again, and I will though at the same time say, I think he has a genuine soft spot for the welfare of children,
Mm-hmm.
and B, what he actually achieved was world historically important goodness
All right.
in at least particularly during World War I, that
Mm-hmm.
food stuff. Yeah, but I think his motivations were. I mean, again, we can't know what's inside somebody's heads, particularly when they burnt all their correspondence.
Which
But
is
I
suspect a little bit.
yeah, he is petty and self-aggrandizing. I said it this time, and Machiavellian. I mean, he is Machiavellian. I think
Okay.
his main beef. I think his main beef with the tragedy of the Treaty of Versailles for him. It's going to be all destruction. He put so much effort into making it work, and they're going to break this thing he put so much effort into. Yeah. I mean,
There is a
maybe a little bit further, but I don't know.
I, I
See,
do
the
remember
only thing, the thing that I would counter to that would be White keeps coming back to this idea that, and it's mostly Lou's mouth, he puts it in,
Okay.
that the Hoovers have no plans. No, there's no structure. They just kind of move through the world and shit happens to them.
yeah. Well, he
Yeah.
uses the phrase on the jump.
Yeah, on the
Yeah.
jump. Yeah,
And
that's
Hoover
part of that.
seems to
Yeah.
be, even before he uses the phrase in his like 30s and 40s in the London time period, I don't remember him having used the phrase on the jump in the Australian or China period. But broadly, it seems like he's on the jump then too,
Hmm.
and literally has been on the jump since his parents died. But his dad was 6, or he was 6 when his dad died, and like
Yeah.
9 or 10, I think, when his mom died.
Hmm.
And I do remember somebody did a study of, and I think it was American CEOs, but like there's almost 15% of like big high-powered American CEOs had one or more parents die from the time that they were like 8 to 11 or 12.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And that seems to fit this. And part of that, having a parent or multiple parents die in your early youth, seems to make you more of a doer, is the thesis that I read out of this paper
Hmm.
2 decades ago. It had been in the late 90s, early 2000s, I think.
Hmm.
I wish I was keeping better track of what those things were at the time, but because I'd love to revisit that now with
Yeah.
respect to Hoover. But it
Right.
seems to be the thing that makes him a doer,
Hmm.
more than anything else, is that early life loss. And then what do you
Yeah.
make of yourself? How
Yeah.
do you survive and what do you do?
I'll give you the, and I'll give you the I don't think he has a plan. but he has a consistent, you know, does Warren Buffett have a plan? He has a consistent strategy and a consistent,
Yeah.
pr- approach. And,
Right.
that he's, whether or not he knows, okay, I'm going to eventually do this, this, and this, and it's going to make me president, he certainly knows, oh, it would be good for me to, cultivate this person and cultivate that person. He's
To
accumulator.
succeed generally, yeah, I would agree with you in that. Yeah, yeah, and I do think that probably, and to expand on what you're saying, Chris, the idea of of either, childhood trauma or living in a chaotic world where you have to become more self-sufficient and you have to be on the jump all the time. You have to be responding to, challenges and opportunities because there is no safety net. That I
and
think
and
explains.
accumulate and accumulating allies too, because
Yeah,
of,
right, right.
or
And
Well,
you
I
don't
think
have that
I think that
family.
explains a lot about, I mean, really, even going back to history, that explains a lot about, the robber barons and and the whole, kind of for the people who became robber barons, right? That, most of them, you know, were not legacy,
yeah.
folks, right? They were mostly, first generation, wealth, wealth creators, I guess would be the terminology that business would like to use to congratulate itself. But but yeah,
Well,
you know,
but that's the thing. That's the thing too, that Warren Buffett in the framing of Hoover here as a doer, Buffett very early on reads, I think it was Benjamin Graham's The Intelligent Investor, and but he's willing to actually sit down and use his brain and do the actual work to vet the company, see what the mechanics are, how is it run, what is it doing, and is there potential for long-term growth? And then that's where you invest the money.
mhm,
And it's the sitting down and doing the work, whereas a lot of people in this general investment space look at it more as a looser gambling. They don't look at the internals closely. They're like, oh, Apple is hot right now, so let's invest in Apple. Whereas
yeah,
or even if you look at it in horse racing, there is a philosophy called um, overlay. An overlay is you study the horses and their past performance to find out, okay, this group of 10 is racing today, and if you can do the work to figure out where is the edge, I think this horse historically should do better today than all the others.
mm,
But you don't bet based only on that. You look at the play, and has everyone else realized that this horse is going to do well, because then they bet that horse down and the odds go so horribly against it.
right,
You'll make your $2 bet, but if you win anything, you're going to win 10 cents. That makes no sense. What you want is the crowd to go the other way and not realize the horse you've realized is going
right,
to make the money. So
right.
it's a 40 to 1 long shot. And that's the overlay.
So that's the game. It's the relationship between the
So,
market and
yeah.
reality.
So
It's a
then you bet
spectator.
you bet on the long shot because you know the performance is potentially better for reasons.
Hmm.
And that's what Buffett has done
Yeah,
his whole career is,
right.
but you gotta be like Hoover and you gotta do the work.
Yeah. Well,
And
and
if you
Buffett's,
do the work,
Buffett was also very clear-eyed and was not, and was not he wasn't into fooling himself. And I think of, when I was in college, I took a couple of business classes, and we're reading, these Michael Porter, just so stories about about, just really subjective, and really I did think of them as kind of just so stories, because it was just like, okay, that's a way that you could portray that, but is it the right way? Is it the only way? And it seems like that's not what Buffett does.
yeah. Well, or it's the story of the people who shorted the stocks in the crash.
Yeah.
They were watching the market and seeing and doing the research to see what was actually going on.
Mhm.
And because of that, they won big, while the rest of the market was kind of just going with the flow. nobody cares that Moody's or
Right.
their competition is just, oh, if we don't guarantee it, somebody else will and they'll get paid the money.
Yeah.
And when you quit doing the work, that's when the breakdown happens. So,
Right.
as the antipode to Hoover, do the work and watch to find out when others aren't doing their work,
Right. Right.
is a
Yeah.
means of
Right. And then
gaming the system.
add some of that no, well, luck, yeah, luck, obviously, yeah, of course, but also kind of that barbell anti-fragility stuff, where you can make small bets with with big upsides. But yeah, anyways, we are over our time. So next
Hey,
week,
well,
the next section.
sure.
All right,
Sure.
cool.
I'm actually surprised thinking, I mean, it's a fast read, but there's an awful lot to talk about.
Yeah, yeah,
And so like, yeah, it took me, I think maybe an hour and a half to read the second book one or book two or whatever, but it's pretty, yeah, I think we will be able to fill our 2 hours with talking about the next section instead of,
yeah.
even though I know you could just read the whole book probably in the next week with no problem.
Yeah, I think we will fill it out. And so there are three more sections. So we won't get it done before I will have to take 2 weeks off. I guess we'll have to.
Looking at the sections, like am I wrong that basically I feel like the last section is basically his post presidency and it's pretty short. That probably could be combined with the,
Oh, okay. Then we could finish it. Yeah, we might be able to finish it. We'll do section 3 on the 9th and 4 and 5 on the 16th, maybe.
yeah. I mean, mind unless we find ourselves, I mean, it's always we can always change our mind,
Yeah. Yep. Okay.
There is some intrigue in the chapter title, Through the Abyss in a Buick.
Yeah. Yes.
Like
I'm curious about that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Good. Well, this was good. Thank you. I enjoyed it.
So,
Have
yeah,
a good
I'll
weekend.
call in. I mean, is it? I don't really understand the etiquette. Is it okay for me basically to not be on camera while I'm driving across Iowa?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will
Okay.
be I'll be in a car driving on my headset.
I
So.
All
mean,
right.
there are some people watching the video during the week, and
Really?
yeah. Oh, I noticed both Pat and Tim this week, like, have been keeping up with this book. They just aren't here,
Yeah.
or happen
And
not to
Pat
be
said
here.
Pat
So,
did say he had tuned in. So yeah.
hey, Pat,
Yeah.
hey,
So
Tim.
hello everybody. All you lurkers. All right. Ciao.
We got